Teresa that used to call the meeting to order, and I don't know the mechanics of that.
We need to vote somebody in, don't we?
Yeah,
chair.
for a chair, yeah.
And that's something I should have remembered when I talked about it. I forgot.
Who was the previous chair?
Teresa.
Teresa.
That's right.
Wilson.
Yeah.
So typically, I think somebody needs to call the meeting to order.
That would be you.
Members.
Yeah.
Call the meeting to order.
All right, and it looks like the time is 4:06.
Roll call. Diane Crocker.
Brett Casement.
And Dave Gursky. All right, so we can move on to the agenda. So second item after the police department tour, we've got a personnel up a little bit about that, but we just had Stephen Arnst went through the 16-week basic police academy up in Salem. He graduated, I believe it was 2 Fridays ago. So he's started his formal field training. He's been assigned to Sergeant Blake Bowers, and that's his first phase coach. There'll be 4 phases to that. Each one typically takes about 6 weeks. Doesn't always take 6 weeks. Sometimes they get extended if they haven't had exposure to certain types of calls or incidents, or if they don't feel like they're progressing and maybe they need a little bit more time with one coach. But typically it's right around 6 weeks. We're hoping to see him reach or achieve solo status sometime this summer. And that will bring us to 9 sworn. We have 1 position that is currently open. We have it open for a lateral officer or a basic recruit. I think we've seen about 8 or 9 applications that opened last Friday. The sergeants and I will review those here in the next week or so and see if we have anybody that will bring to the next phase of that recruiting process. And then we talked a little bit, we identified who the 2 sergeants were. They do also have some specialized training and skills that we can talk about a little bit. So Blake Bowers is a drug recognition expert. That was a very intense course that he was nominated for. You've got to go through, the district attorney has to have previewed some of your reports, prosecuted some of your cases. They will then nominate for that program. You need one of the local DRE trainers or instructors will also have to nominate you for that. And then he was accepted into that program. They only accept a few, and it's very rigorous. At any rate, he can get called out in the middle of the night if we have somebody or a neighboring agency has somebody that's suspected of driving under the influence of intoxicants, and that's not alcohol. It would be, they believe, drugs or maybe a medical condition. They would call for a drug recognition expert who has more training and experience to kind of identify those clinical indicators and then be able to write a report, collect the appropriate evidence, whether that's blood or urine, and then they're also a great resource for some of our other officers with regards to DUI investigations. He's also on the major crash team. So whenever there's a fatal crash or a hit and run or something where the team gets called out, and that's a regional team with Benton County, Albany State Police, and I believe Corvallis Police, and also Philomath. He's the only one representative that we have from our department on that team. We've gone through some specialized training for that. He's probably gets, I would say, maybe 10 to 12 call outs a year. I think that's pretty average. So it's not a heavily demanding, but sometimes they come back to back, as we've seen with Highway 20.
Are there others in Benton County, or is he the only one?
Other DREs? Yes, there are multiple. So I'm aware Corvallis has DREs, Benton County has DREs, State Police does, most of our neighboring agencies do. I'm uncertain as to whether or not OSU Police has sent anybody through that program, but they also have a list and dispatch for all of the DREs in our region, and then they can do an all-page. If it's something that happens in the middle of the night and there's not one on duty, then they can also page them out from home. Sometimes our DREs may go over to Newport or Lincoln County to assist with an investigation over there. Brandon Thurman, or Sergeant Thurman, he is kind of our child and sexual assault expert. He attends the multiple different, they're like a multidisciplinary group that staffs those cases. He just got back from Huntsville, Alabama. He was there for a week. The CAMI grant paid for training. Sergeant Bowers has also gone through some advanced training just this last month over in executing drug drivers. That was one where there was law enforcement and prosecutors present, and they got to kind of go through some mock trials and things like that. There were some local experts that helped put that class on. Think of what else we have for. We also have Blake Bowers, or Sergeant Bowers, is also a taser instructor. Is also a EVOC instructor for emergency vehicle operations. So that's some training that we have to do annually. I think that's about it for the personnel updates. Are there any questions?
Do they, like Sergeant Bowers, does he train the rest of the crew on tasers? Is that part of
Yes.
his job that he's, yeah,
So we hold annual training for tasers. We have a recertification process where accreditation mandates that we have that training for our officers annually, and so we need to have an instructor. Otherwise, we have to go out to another agency and have one of their instructors come in. Two currently, we've got him, and then we also have Connor Ringwald. He came to us from Toledo PD about 6 months ago, I think now, and he had that training prior to getting here. And we actually hosted that with Benton County right here in this room about 3 months ago.
great.
And one of the things that we're looking for with regards to core discipline instructors, we're missing a DTs instructor, a use of force instructor, and there's a few others where when we have to host that mandated training, we do have to go outside. So we'll usually look to one of our other partners like Corvallis Police Department or Benton County Sheriff's Office, and they'll send someone over so we can accommodate that.
Is there a cost then for us to do that?
Typically not. They've been very generous with their time, and we appreciate that very much. And then I put budget review on here. I sent a copy of last year's budget out to everybody, just wondering if there, and some of the areas where I thought we might have some questions, and I know some of these came up from the city council and from the budget committee last year, was just kind of the definition or the narrative portion of that. And I was hoping that if there were any questions or any clarifications that you guys have, that we could cover that in this meeting.
Not for me, mostly just because, number one, it's so well organized and the narrative part helped a lot. I've seen enough fire department budgets to understand the process behind it and not to get all the way down into the weeds. And the fact of the matter is that, you know, there's a whole other thing with the whole budget process anyway that's kind of surrounding it. So my approach is typically, like, listen, unless there's something that's just floating at the top, it's like we need to allocate funds, and this is like a big deal for us. I would rather know that from you saying, this is, you know, what's on my radar here, and this is coming. You know what I mean?
Certainly, and I think that's one of the nice things. Chris and I have a really good relationship where when I come to him with budgetary needs, I put him in either two categories. It's either a want or it's a need, and I'm very upfront about that. I think that's important. There are certainly things that will make our job a little bit easier, but are they a need? Do we need them to to police the city of Philomath? Sometimes we don't, but sometimes we do. But, you know, patrol cars are one of those items. It sounds like no questions about the budget.
I don't think so. And maybe one quick thing, just so we don't forget some things on the agenda. So since this is your second term on the committee, I would move to make Diane Crocker the chair.
I was going to move to have,
I beat you.
yeah, darn it.
But
Because he's
but
the
if you
specialty.
don't wish, I
I've
certainly
got
support
plenty on
Rick
my
Salsa
plate,
as well.
but I'm sure all three of us have plenty on our plate, so,
Thank you.
Do you have
I'm
time
actually
to do-
chairing the
okay.
Public Works.
Right, and I did think about that. I was sharing the load a little bit. And
Okay, yeah. I was just,
And so you're.
I did make a motion, yes. Yep.
Okay, then I second that motion.
You can always reject.
no, I'm
Okay.
gonna accept it because if you're both already doing that, that's good.
Okay, on the nod,
Think it's official.
done
Thank
deal.
you.
And then I guess there's the approval of the minutes as well.
Yeah? Are we gonna do that?
Oh,
We need to approve the minutes from September 10th, 2024.
This is tricky because neither one of us
Yeah,
were
you-
there.
So I will
so-
approve the minutes, or I move to approve the minutes.
I will second that.
September 10th, 2024. We don't typically go this long between meetings. This is crazy stuff, because it's usually every other month. So I would hope that we'll be doing that.
Copy.
all right, and we're moving on to accreditation.
Yes.
Regular.
Yes.
Program progress.
So we've been accredited through the Oregon Accreditation Alliance, which is now the Northwest Accreditation Alliance since 2010. There's a 3-year process where they take a look at the previous 3 years, and there's a number of benchmarks that we need to meet with regards to training, evidence handling, evidence audits, policy manuals, and I'm giving you, it's a very high level overview because there's 115 different standards that we're graded on. And so we're not affiliated with Northwest Accreditation Alliance other than we pay them to come in and do this independent audit of our department. That the on-site audit happens every 3 years. We have a computer program called Power DMS that organizes that data in a certain format that makes it more efficient for them to review our files. And we can provide them with a login, and it's usually something they can do off-site, and then they will come on-site for approximately a day. It's usually 6 to 8 hours to do the on-site review. Prior to that software being purchased, the Power DMS software, we were doing this by hand. And so we were doing it with paper documents in files, and they were having to come on-site for multiple days to review the files and then also do the on-site review. To give you an idea of one of the things that it helps us do is it helps us hit our training goals, and some of those are mandates by the state. The Academy DPSST requires training, and also Oregon Accreditation Alliance or Northwest Accreditation Alliance also has similar mandates for certain categories of training. And so either myself or one of our sergeants will come up with the training plan for the year. To give you an overview of the 24-25 Philomath Police Department training plan, I'll go through some of the mandated items so it kind of gives you an idea of the types of training that we're doing. And I can certainly make these available to you in paper copies at any point if you'd like those. So baton training, and these include policy review and or actual practical training. So for defensive tactics, we would do a policy review of that, and then we would also do the hands-on portion of that with the practical skills. Handcuffing, bias-based policing, equity, bloodborne pathogen training, child abuse, to include Carley's Law, consular notification, use of force, ethics, airway circulation, anatomy and physiology, mental health and crisis intervention, domestic violence response, EVOC, which is the Emergency Vehicle Operations course, fire extinguisher use, hazardous materials, missing child investigations, hate crimes, OC or capstun pepper spray, emergency operations plan, taser, workplace harassment and discrimination, workplace safety, state mandated training, which would be some of those are legal updates and things like that. And then there's some high liability issues as well. And sometimes that could be like, I guess an example of right now, could be one of those. That's something that we don't always deal with. And then we've got changes in case law, department policies and procedures, and then we have firearms. And that's something that's kind of ongoing through the year. Typically, we try and do that quarterly at a minimum. When the weather's nice, we usually get out there about once a month, and that's training with handguns, rifles, and we also have some other less lethal options. They're 40 millimeter launchers that we can use that shoot like a sponge round. That's kind of an overview of the training. We've got a file, it's a training roster that we file with the state of Oregon or with DPSST, and then you can log into IRIS, which is a I guess it's a public database that shows the different officers' training, where they've received that training, any specialized training, certifications, things like that. So that's where that gets documented. We need to provide proofs of compliance to the accreditation folks when they come to do our review. We also have on-site inspections that we have to do for the evidence room. We'll usually have a neighboring agency come in and do a spot audit where we'll print out a random property, and then we'll provide them with an opportunity to find that property within those bins. And then they usually send us a memo. We sign off on the memo that goes in our accreditation file. Anytime there's a change in, as far as like the chief of police leaving or something like that, or if there is evidence, then we might be required to do a wall-to-wall audit, which Katie and I just finished several months ago, and we had a little over 3,000 items of evidence, and we put hands on every single one of those items to ensure that they're there. That document also goes into the accreditation file. They'll come out and then they'll provide kind of a summary. If there's some areas that we didn't quite hit the benchmark for that, then they'll say, okay, next year you need to do better. Some of those are critical errors where they might put us on probation, or they might say, no, I'm sorry, you didn't follow nearly enough of what we prescribed that you needed to do. And so we're actually going to suspend your accreditation, and then you have to start over, and it's another 3-year. Right now we go through re-accreditation. We've not had a break in that status with Accreditation Alliance. So.
Is it just a pass, not pass scale?
So it is for each one of those, and if I remember right, they're called standards. So there are 115 different standards. Some of them are not applicable to us. Like we don't have an air unit, and so we don't have to show proof of compliance for that. But they will go through and they'll look at our policies and they'll look at each one of those proofs. Like we have to make sure that our body armor is not expired, that everybody has the everybody's been outfitted with properly fitting body armor. So they're going to look at those things, and then they will just check those off. If those have been met, then yes, we'll check that off. And then at the on-site review, they'll also look at document organization, how our personnel files are structured and things like that. And some of those might meet best practice, but maybe not the Accreditation Alliance standard. And so there might be some recommendations, like you might think about an added layer of security. Like my office locks, it's also alarmed, and then all my personnel files are locked up in a cabinet. So, and same thing with evidence type things. We've got to have alarm systems. We've got to have cyber locks on there that track who's coming and going from the evidence room, and not the one where they process the evidence. It's actually the evidence technician or myself, and then we've got a sign-in sheet that we need to maintain. And so there's a number of different things that they're looking at. It's very deep dive into everything that we do, and it helps us to check our blind spots really, because in this day and age, there's so many different things that are changing within law enforcement. It's hard to keep up. And so that's one of the things that accreditation helps with, and also Lexipol policies, because they will send out those updates, and they're looking for state changes in state law, federal law, Northwest Accreditation Alliance standard changes, and then also best practices. And so we've got a couple different entities that are looking into how we do business and making recommendations, or at least providing us with the information so we can stay up to date with those things. Questions about accreditation? It's kind of it's a large topic. It's very in depth.
CBR AED?
Yes, that is another requirement that falls under our state mandated training.
Okay.
And that's something that we receive, I believe it's every 2 years,
2 years.
To be current. And we get emails quite frequently from DPSST warning us like, hey, within the next 3 months or the next 6 months, you've got officers that are going to expire. We've now got it to where everybody's on the same rotation. So everybody expires at the same 2-year interval. And so we only have to host that training once every 2 years, and we're not having to get an instructor to come in 6 months, if we've got staggering expiration dates with our officers. So that's been helpful.
Accreditation process sounds very intense, but it sounds like you're doing a great job. If you can put your hand on all 3,000 items, that's incredible. Where does the buck stop? Is it with you, or who actually make sure that it's all where it needs to be all the time? You and Katie, or is it just you? Or?
Right now, it's just me. Most agencies have an accreditation manager, and it's a full-time job. It would not be a full-time job for the city of Philomath. It is very demanding to keep up on it, and it requires a lot of time. There are certain components of that, like the training plan, that get delegated to the sergeants, so they help out with that. And then with regards to pulling reports for proofs of compliance, so if we're saying that when we get in a pursuit, we've got a policy that governs that. There's a time to shut it down. There's a time to continue. And there's a number of different variables there and restrictions for us with things like that. So annually, we've got to do a pursuit review. And so Katie will oftentimes pull those reports for us. And then we've got a committee that meets and we review each one of those pursuits for that 12-month period of time. And we compare it to the policy to make sure that it's within policy. And if it's not, then we need to change our training or we need to change our policy, one of the two. And usually it's changing our training and doing a better job of educating.
Committee members, are they from your staff, the police officers?
Yeah, so we have,
That's a lot of extra time.
I sit on that committee, we have a sergeant that's on it, and then we have a union member that's on that. And then we also have the same thing for use of force. So all of our use of forces are tracked, and there's a report that's generated with that, and we do a use of force review. And the sergeants are reviewing those as they're coming in, but we do a more formal review as a group, and we talk about those things. And if we need to change policy or change some of our training, that's what comes out of that. And then also, the Northwest Accreditation Alliance is making sure that we are holding those. And I generate a memo that says, on this date and time, we reviewed these particular events and we found them to be in policy or out of policy. And these are the recommendations or the changes that we want to do.
So did I hear you say you don't really have a training officer, that your sergeants, is that the right terminology, help do that?
They do, so they create the training plan for the year. And that,
Two of them.
correct. And this year, since they're new to their positions and I was doing that as a lieutenant prior to that, I'm helping out with that and help crafting that. In fact, we also have meetings on a regular basis where we talk about other trainings that we think would be beneficial to the staff that are above and beyond. These are just the mandated trainings that we listed off. There's interview interrogation. There's a number of different ARIDE, which is an advanced roadside impairment detection class that we try and send all of our officers to, usually within the first 2 years. So they have a little bit more expertise in detecting DUIs. So there's a number of other trainings that happen as well. And then there are certain things that officers will come to us when we're doing their annual evals and they'll say, hey, I really want to get better at this. And would you send me to training? And then we've got instructor development for, firearms and some of these other disciplines where we're trying to create.
Never go home.
Yes,
Sounds like an awful lot on your plate.
it is, but
The nice thing about it though is once you up and running that well oiled, then to make it run forward is a lot less intense than that first part. And I'm encouraged by, number one, your reaccreditation, process. That, cause that's, once you fall behind, it's just becomes a nightmare actually. So well done, basically, to you and your staff.
Thank you.
For doing all of that work and doing work. By the way, there's other things. So the world doesn't
Your real
stop
world.
while you
Your
have to
real
do all of this other stuff, so.
And you
it's
bring up
amazing.
a great point. That was something when we were short-staffed
Yeah,
about a year or so ago. We only had enough officers to cover just the 12-hour shifts. So we had 2 that were working opposite each other on day shift. They were working 4 on, and then the other one would come on and work their 4 off, and then the same thing with graveyard. And then trying to call them in for additional training was very difficult.
Yeah,
At the same time,
Yeah.
we didn't want to burn them out, but we've got this state mandated
But you
training.
gotta- Yeah,
It's got to be done. And in this day and age, I think it's incredibly difficult, or increasingly more difficult, to run a professional agency. And I think that's what all of our communities are expecting. That's the expectation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So. And Northwest Accreditation Alliance does a really good job of supporting us in this as well. So there's a number of different resources on their website that we can log into. There's a point of contact if we have questions. I'm unsure of what you want for this proof of compliance. Can you give me an example? And they're more than willing to do that and very responsive. So,
Good.
any other questions on accreditation?
Not on accreditation.
All right. Anything else?
Yeah. Always. Cahoots. I had heard rumors that they were gonna try to bring some of that to Corvallis, but then I've just heard that they're cutting the funding for Eugene, so I'm assuming there's nothing like that around here.
I had heard that. I also know that there's a program, I believe it's Salem and Kaiser, and I believe it started about the same time as Cahoots did. And it seems to be a very effective program. It requires additional staffing and funding, not only at the municipal level, but also county and everybody else that's going to be involved, right, with mental health. Corvallis has a program similar to that. It's not quite as robust, and we don't have I don't know that there's anybody else that's participating in that. We have Benton County Mental Health as a resource, and then anybody else in our region that has specialized training, we could certainly reach out to.
And aren't they still building a mental health facility?
They are.
Is that for the whole county?
It is, and I
And
believe
so-
it's about to be completed.
That will be wonderful.
Yep.
I hope it turns out the way they want it to be. And I've got one little, there's a parked car on 30th Street, parked the wrong way that I've been told by a citizen that's been there for over a month. And I've got a picture of it, and I mentioned to Chris yesterday, and he said he would talk and maybe get a chalk mark or something on it.
Yeah.
But just because a citizen happened to mention it to me, I just thought that I would bring it up to you since I had this meeting. But there's actually a couple of cars
Good
on
the order.
30th that is they're parked on the wrong side of the street. Maybe this person started the trend, and the citizen thought there was some whatever the word, breaking of the windshield wipers or vandalism to the car. I can't tell if that's what it really was, but anyway, yeah.
And I would encourage any of the citizens that you have contact with, if they've got an ordinance violation or they want to report something, please call us, because otherwise we're unaware of it. This is certainly something that
Yeah.
we do on a regular basis. In fact, I was just having a conversation with one of our officers before we started the meeting about someone that had been dodging our stickers, and we would apply a sticker and then they would move it somewhere else in the city.
Block, yeah.
And so, yeah, we
Well,
definitely deal with those issues. for sure.
I suggested that to the citizen. Oh, no, I don't want to bother them. I said, okay, I'm your city councilor. I can.
Sure, we will definitely address that issue.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Is there anything that you see from us and the committee, I mean, other than just kind of a reporting platform, which is great, but is there anything that you need from us in particular that would assist you in your mission?
That's a great question. And I think education and being able to share what we do, I think that was what this agenda was kind of built around, was giving you an overview of kind of the police department, what that facility looks like. You can see if there's areas of need or concern. We can talk about those sorts of things. I think personnel updates is important, and kind of having a catalog in your mind of what skill sets, some of our specialized skill sets we have, and keep continuing to try and develop those. And same thing with the training schedule, and then also the Accreditation Alliance, making sure that everybody has a good understanding for what that means and what that contains. And I think there are times where in city council meetings something might come up, and I think that would be a good opportunity for you guys to have some specialized insight or knowledge about the police department, the training, what we're doing. I think that's where that would be most helpful. And then, of course, if there was anything, questions that you might have that come up of the police department, or how does this work, or where do you get funding for that, I'd be more than happy to put those on the agenda as well. And cover. But really, I think, mainly just sharing information about what
And even in the public, I mean, an example about a year ago, I had a former student complaining about the police. They never stop anybody. They never patrol anything. And so I went to him and he said, we stopped 8 people just last week on that very road. And so then I told that person that and promoting the good of our police officers. And he said, oh, I didn't know. Okay, well, I'm glad to hear that, so
Education.
just, yeah, education to the community, putting up a good front so they understand that we are supportive of the police officers. But, and the knowledge that I get in this meeting has helped me to do that more than once, but yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like I've only been participating in the police committee for maybe a little over a year now. And it seems like we've always had positive, supportive interactions. We've always had great discussions. I always look forward to the meetings.
Good.
Yeah.
That's all I have.
Same here.
All right.
Okay, when's our next meeting? See, that's on the thing. See?
Look at that.
So I would say we can look at either doing them every 2 months or quarterly, depending on your guys' schedule and what we have for agenda items. I'm more than willing to set the next one for 2 months out, and then we can kind of evaluate it as we move on. If we have less content to cover and talk about, maybe we move it to quarterly or
Yeah.
every 3 months.
let's do
However you guys would like to do it.
I think also, even if it is a quarterly meeting, it doesn't mean that we can't interact in the meantime. If something critical comes up, we can certainly do that. So at first blush, it seems like quarterly is sufficient, but that's just my first blush on it, yeah, so.
Yep.
It's usually the second Tuesday of the month. correct?
Yes.
And April, May, June. So that would be June 10th. Have that right? I think so.
Okay, here.
Three or four.
Does 3 o'clock work for everybody?
It does.
For me.
All right.
Yep.
That sounds good.
June 10th, 3 p.m. it is.
With that, we will adjourn the meeting.
All right.
Yeah.